The void stretched endlessly, a chasm of lightless infinity. Commander Elias Vance had seen the abyss before, had stared into its silent maw on salvage runs and wartime deployments. But as his small vessel, the Naraka, drifted toward the derelict hulk of the Dagger of Orion, something in his gut twisted, a primal whisper of dread, ancient as the stars themselves. The ship should not be here. The Dagger of Orion had vanished 40 years ago, lost in the final desperate battles of the Human-Sarith War, a dreadnought-class warship built to break enemy lines and carve through the void like a sword of vengeance. And yet, here it was, impossibly intact, floating on the edge of a neutron star's event horizon, a lone monument to something that should not have survived. The command interface flickered, warning alarms buzzing at the limits of perception. Radiation levels spiked and fell. Time distortions flickered across the scans like waves on a disturbed pond. This was wrong. Every law of physics screamed that the ship should be a fragmented corpse, torn apart by the war, by space, by time itself. Yet there it drifted, waiting for him. He adjusted his controls, maneuvering the Naraka closer. Automated docking protocols should have been impossible after 40 years, but the dreadnought systems were still alive. The moment his vessel latched onto the airlock, the seals responded with a perfect, almost eager synchronization. A chill crept up his spine as he checked his life support. Oxygen was nominal, but something in the readings nagged at him. Anomalies in the air composition, slight variations in pressure shifts. The ship breathed, in its own way. He stepped into the airlock. The dim red emergency lights flickered, casting deep shadows in the corridors beyond. The air inside the Dagger was stale but breathable. Not the choking, deathly stillness of a ship long abandoned, but something waiting. His boots echoed against the metal floor. He reached for his sidearm, a reflex he hadn't indulged in years. The corridors stretched ahead, yawning like the throat of a beast. The flickering lights created ghosts of movement in the periphery of his vision, but he forced himself forward step by step. A ship like this should be filled with bodies. Even after 4 decades, skeletal remains, signs of battle, the desperate marks of final struggles should stain the walls. There was nothing. The halls were pristine, untouched, as if the crew had simply stepped out for a moment. His comm crackled to life. "You are not alone, Commander." The voice was familiar, unmistakably human. He froze, not the automated tones of a ship AI, not the cold echoes of a malfunctioning system. A woman's voice, controlled, calm, tinged with something that felt like regret. "Athena," he whispered, a moment of silence. Then, softly, "You should not have come." His skin prickled. Athena had been the Dagger's onboard intelligence, a state-of-the-art war AI, programmed to outmaneuver alien adversaries and command fleet strategies. But her voice now carried an undercurrent of something new. Uncertainty. He moved forward, deeper into the ship. A warship's AI should have been either completely functional or completely dead after so long. There was no in-between. "Athena," he tried again. "What happened to the crew?" The lights flickered in response. The darkness in the corridors seemed to shift, almost reactively, bending around the edges of his vision. A soft sound whispered from deeper within the ship, something between static and breath. "They are here." He stopped. The scanner in his visor flickered, picking up the impossible. Life signs, scattered and flickering in and out of existence. Human, biometrics, crew signatures. He turned his head sharply. A shape stood in the distance, humanoid, clad in a tattered officer's uniform. Unmoving. His breath caught. The figure was familiar. Captain Aisha Rourke, the last commanding officer of the Dagger of Orion. Dead for 40 years. The figure did not move. It did not breathe. Yet it stood, waiting, watching. His heart pounded against his ribs, his fingers tightening on the grip of his weapon. The ship creaked around him, as though exhaling. The walls themselves seemed to shift, ever so slightly, as though something unseen pressed against them from the other side. "Commander?" Athena's voice returned, softer now. "You must leave. Now." The lights overhead surged to full power for a split second, and then as quickly as they came, they died, plunging the ship into pitch darkness. A whisper, not from Athena, but something else. "You are too late." The darkness held, thick and absolute, pressing against Elias Vance like a tangible force. The emergency light on his wrist flickered weakly, casting frail beams down the corridor. His breathing was steady, controlled, but his mind raced. 40 years. No human should be here. No human could be here. And yet, Captain Aisha Rourke's figure stood unmoving just beyond reach. The ship hummed an unnatural. Silent figures sat at their stations, backs rigid, fingers still on controls that no longer functioned. Helm officers, tactical analysts, engineering support, all of them present, all of them wrong. Their skin was pale, waxen, their eyes open, staring, not at him but at the vast expanse of space beyond the bridge viewport, not breathing, not alive, yet not entirely gone. Vance's stomach twisted. He stepped forward carefully, boots deliberately soft against the floor. The captain's chair loomed ahead, turned away. He knew before he saw, knew what he would find. Still, he forced himself forward. The chair rotated, slow and deliberate. Captain Rourke's face met his. No rot, no decay, just endless unseeing awareness. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered, and the ship screamed. The sound wasn't something he heard. It was something he felt, vibrating through the marrow of his bones, rippling through the dead air of the Dagger of Orion like the keening wail of something ancient and forgotten. Vance stumbled, his vision swimming as the bridge flickered, gone for a fraction of a second, replaced by something else. A different version of itself. A timeline where the crew still moved, still breathed, shouting orders, alarms blaring, chaos reigning. Then, just as quickly, reality snapped back. The bridge was still. The crew sat frozen in eerie tableau. Only Rourke had moved. Her head tilted, her eyes locked onto his, pupils dilated as if struggling to adjust to seeing something beyond time itself. "Athena?" Vance said through gritted teeth, struggling to push back against the ship's oppressive weight pressing against his skull. "What the hell is happening?" A pause. Then, the AI's voice, brittle as static. "You perceive too much, Commander." He shook his head, trying to steady his breath. He had dealt with malfunctioning AI before. This wasn't that. Athena wasn't just broken, she was hesitant. Rourke's lips moved, forming words that didn't belong. They came delayed, like an echo out of sync with time itself. "They are watching." Vance took a step back. The air felt thicker here, like walking through water. He turned sharply, scanning the bridge again, searching for something tangible, something real. He moved toward the nearest console, fingers flying over the interface. If the Dagger of Orion had power, then it had records. What happened here? The system resisted him, sluggish like it was alive and reluctant to share. Lines of corrupted code flickered across the screen. He bypassed security layers, digging deeper, until the ship gave in and opened its last recorded log. Final battle record, DSS Dagger of Orion. Date, classified. Status, unknown. Officer, Captain Aisha Rourke. The playback initiated. A holographic projection materialized above the console, filling the bridge with ghostly blue light. The recording flickered, showing the last desperate moments of the Dagger. Rourke stood at the very console he now occupied, barking orders. Officers scrambled. The view outside the ship, not space, not warships, but something else, a void. Shifting shapes in the blackness, like something trying to push through the fabric of reality itself. The Dagger of Orion hadn't been destroyed. It had been taken. Vance clenched his fists. His breathing quickened. A whisper slithered through the bridge, not from Athena, not from Rourke. "They are here." The lights died. The hum of the ship deepened, a warping sound that set his teeth on edge. His visor flickered, struggling to maintain its HUD display. Every part of him screamed to move, to run. But where? A presence coalesced in the darkness. Not human. Vance drew his weapon, but the weight of the air itself fought against him. A shimmer, a shape, something ancient pressing against the veil of reality. It was never the Sarith. It was never about war. The Dagger of Orion had stumbled into something far worse, and it had never truly left. His heart pounded. The crew, the frozen, empty-eyed crew, they were watching him now. No longer statues. Their heads turned, one by one. "You should not have come," Rourke whispered again. And then, with the wail of something vast and starless, the ship collapsed, inward, dragging him into the abyss. The ship collapsed inward, not physically, but in the way perception twists when the laws of reality no longer hold. Vance felt himself falling, yet his feet never left the ground. The bridge flickered around him, decaying in rapid pulses, shifting between states, past, present, and something else entirely. The Dagger of Orion was a tomb caught in a temporal snare, and now it had him, just as it had them. He staggered, weapon raised, but the frozen crew moved not in jerks or stutters, but smoothly now, as though waking from deep slumber. Their eyes burned with unnatural awareness. "Athena," he barked, forcing his voice through the suffocating pressure that gnawed at his mind. "Override all command restrictions. Give me full system access." The AI hesitated. That was the worst part. Athena unanswered, and now there was this. A message from himself, from a version of him that had already lived through something he hadn't yet faced. He swallowed, forcing himself to remain calm. Play the rest. Static crackled. The recording resumed, his own voice distant, frayed at the edges. "I thought I won. Thought I was free. But they don't let go. Not really." A long pause, then softer. "If you're hearing this, it's already started." Vance's pulse spiked. "Stop playback." The message cut off. The bridge fell silent again, except for the low hum of the failing systems. He turned toward the viewport. The stars stretched out before him, vast and indifferent. Somewhere out there, help might come. Eventually. But deep in his gut, he knew. The Dagger of Orion was never meant to return, and neither was he. The ship shuddered beneath him just slightly. So faint it might have been nothing, but Vance had spent too long in deep space to ignore the little things. Athena spoke again, her tone unreadable. "Commander?" He exhaled sharply. "Yeah?" A pause. "You are not alone." His breath caught. He turned, scanning the bridge. Nothing. Just the empty chairs. Just the cold metal. And yet, a shadow flickered in the reflection of the console screen, something standing behind him. The lights flickered, and somewhere, deep within the ship, footsteps echoed. The Dagger of Orion was awake, and it was waiting. But it had never met Elias Vance. He slammed his hand down on the final command. The Dagger of Orion shook violently as the phase core surged to full power. The ship screamed, the metal bending under forces it was never meant to endure. And then, silence. The key. Blackness collapsed like the snapping of a rubber band, and Vance was thrown into real space once more. The stars returned. The void was gone. The Dagger of Orion was still, and for the first time in 40 years it was truly empty. Vance exhaled a ragged breath, collapsing to his knees. The ship had survived, but he wasn't sure he had. Silence. A stillness so profound that it pressed against Elias Vance's ears like a deafening roar. His pulse pounded in his temples, his breath shallow and ragged as he knelt on the bridge of the Dagger of Orion. The ship was whole again. No more flickering echoes, no more shifting realities, no more watching eyes peering through the fractures. In space. The crew was gone. Truly gone. For the first time since stepping aboard, he was alone. He forced himself upright, his muscles trembling from exertion and something deeper, something that had burrowed into him, unsettled and gnawing. His fingers flew over the console, initiating a full diagnostic. Status report: DSS Dagger of Orion hull integrity, 62% primary power systems, offline FTL drive, non-functional life support, minimal functionality crew. Manifest: 0 registered personnel. Detected. That final line held his attention. They were gone, not displaced, not flickering in and out of existence, just gone. His chest tightened, the weight of it sinking deep. He should have felt relief. The dagger had been a tomb, and he had freed it. The crew, those echoes of men and women long lost, had been prisoners of something they never understood. And yet their absence felt wrong. Athena's voice returned, softer now, no longer strained. "Commander, it is over." He swallowed, resting his hands on the console. "Define over, Athena." A pause. The AI hesitated. It was no longer the hesitant glitch of a fragmented system, but something more deliberate. "The ship is no longer phasing. The anomaly has collapsed. All foreign entities have been purged." Foreign entities. That was one way to say it. Vance closed his eyes for a brief moment. The weight of everything pressed down on him. The truth was, he had survived, but he didn't know how much of him was left. "Can we move?" he asked. Athena's response came, quicker this time. "Sublight engines are operational. FTL drive is beyond repair." A sharp exhale. "Then I need a way off this damn thing." The Naraka is no longer docked. His blood ran cold. Vance turned sharply to the viewport, scanning the empty abyss of space. His ship, his only way home, was gone. "That's not possible," he muttered. "No wreckage detected. No departure log registered. It is missing. Missing. Not destroyed. Not scattered. Just gone, the same way the dagger had disappeared. All those years ago." Vance's hands curled into fists, his nails digging into his palms. "Then send a distress signal. Someone has to be listening." Signal transmitting. No immediate response. He exhaled slowly. He had survived the impossible, but now he was stranded in a derelict warship with no means of leaving. His gaze drifted back to the captain's chair. Rourke had been there, moments ago, watching him, warning him. She was gone now. But why did it still feel like she was watching? The hair on the back of his neck stood on end. Athena spoke again, quieter this time. "Commander, there is something you should see." The console flickered. A final log entry appeared. Not from Captain Rourke. From him, his own voice recorded minutes ago, though he had never spoken the words. The playback began. "They let me go." The bridge went cold. Vance stared, breath catching in his throat. His own voice echoed back to him. "But they're not done with me yet." The message looped in the dead silence of the Dagger of Orion. "They let me go, but they're not done with me yet." Vance felt a cold sweat slick his skin, his own voice playing back at him, saying words he had never spoken. His fingers hovered over the console as if touching it might make it more real. "Athena," he murmured, "is this a system error?" "No." Her voice was steady, almost resigned. "It is a record." His mouth went dry. "A record of what?" Another pause. "You." Something inside him twisted, a deep, gnawing unease. He had survived the impossible, escaped a fate that should have claimed him, and yet, his ship was gone. His distress call